Hi Libra Sun and Rising. Welcome to a video about the transits of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, beginning in December 2020 and lasting all of 2021, and for Saturn, even beyond that. So it's important to mention first and foremost that when Jupiter and Saturn will enter, the fifth house for you will differ based on your personal natal chart, or if you are listening to this for your sun, based on your solar charts. So I do give dates, but it might impact you at a later date. If you are interested in me looking at your chart, not just for Jupiter and Saturn, but other transits, and also interpreting your natal chart, you can check out my information. The link is below. But I do like to let people know about the fact that sometimes these are going to, well, all the times it's going to play out differently based on your sun or rising degree. So I'm really excited for you, Libra, because Aquarius is an air sign just like you are, the other one being Gemini, and therefore it forms a trine to you. So it's a very easy flow with a trine. It makes it, I don't want to use the word effortless because, life doesn't really work that way. We do have to put in some effort, right? But it isn't as much of a struggle. So you have had both of these planets, both in Capricorn, in the past year. Actually, with Saturn, it's been the past few months when Saturn had retrograded into Capricorn, and but also at the beginning of the year, it was in Capricorn. And it will be there, though, even though Saturn has now gone direct. I'm recording this in November, and Saturn will go into Aquarius in the latter part of December. So, you've had, I'll just say for the past several months, you've had both of these planets in Capricorn. And this is a square for Libra, and this creates friction. And squares can create obstacles. And with Saturn, you're already talking about a planet that can create obstacles. So it can be particularly frustrating to have Saturn, in this case, in your fourth house of home and family. There may have been a lot of like duties that you have felt you've had to, obligations that relate to maybe even your family of origin, your mother, taking care of someone, or your house, situation with your house that has felt kind of maybe oppressive or frustrating in some way. However, at the same time, Jupiter being in the same sign, there may have been some wonderful developments. So this is the interesting thing when these two planets are working in tandem. Are they working in tandem, or are they canceling each other out? Jupiter is the planet of optimism, of life philosophy, expansion. That feeling of being upbeat and lending, positivity to situations, a can-do attitude. Actual financial gain can result from this. Luck, that kind of thing. Being in the right place at the right time, which I don't call luck anymore. I call it alignment. And Saturn is like that strict father who is trying to keep you in line. And when it's in the same, sign, it can actually be really good. Some astrologers tend to look at it like, well, even Jupiter being in Capricorn was not good enough for them, because they thought, well, Jupiter's in a very restrictive sign. But they forget, anybody who criticizes that placement forgets that Jupiter isn't perfect, and Jupiter has its own flaws, such as being excessive, whether it's excessively optimistic, which is unrealistic, being, wasteful. Saturn is very conservative, conserving things. That is not bad. Sometimes it's bad to waste. Well, I think it's always bad to waste, but I have Mars in Capricorn, so there you go. All right, well, let's talk about, what's going to happen for you, or what could, I don't want to say is going to. With Jupiter in the fifth house, well, let's talk about what is the fifth house. The fifth house is the house of pleasure. In astrology, Leo rules this house, and Leo's ruler is the sun. Now think of the tarot, if you know anything about the tarot. What does the sun card represent? The sun card, whenever I'm doing a tarot reading, and it's like, I'm saying, okay, well, here's the sun card. I might have gotten the sun card for you in the last reading I did. I don't know, Libra. They're all starting to run together for me, but prosperity, joy, love, children is and so these are all things we could say about the fifth house as well. Creativity. And so, for instance, you might be very creative at this time. One thing I didn't find is that the fifth house can be the business that you own. Now, I haven't, I think I've only heard one or two astrologers tie this into the fifth house. And I had somebody comment to me and said, where do you get this idea that it's that? Well, I've looked it up independently and haven't found that out. But what I would say is probably the rationale for that is that the fifth house are your hobbies and your pleasures. So, typically when you start a business, I would think a lot of people are going to do so with something that they are already into. Maybe they're doing it for free. That certainly was true for me when I started doing this. So you may find something that you love to do as a hobby, Libra, that you can do for a living. And, there's a sense of value in that you're taking that. But also, and so what's great too is that you're very creative. You could have a lot of what do they call that? Being very prolific, in your output if you are an artist. And your creativity could reach a larger audience, and that means that you could get some form of recognition from it. So let's say you're a writer, and maybe you have a cult following, or maybe you don't have a following at all. Maybe this is the time, because of that expansive nature of Jupiter, that you could actually see a greater audience. Now, of course, that means that you would have to put it out there. That's always where I come in with self-empowerment and all of this stuff as it relates to astrology, of not just expecting things to just drop from the sky. So if you're somebody who is capable of putting yourself out there, and it's not that easy if you're creative, because it's easier to apply for a job and get rejected than to put your heart and soul into something and then feel like it was rejected or nobody wants this. So a lot of people play games with themselves when they are creative, and they kind of make excuses why they can't do this or they can't do that, but you can. If you are a writer, you can self-publish. You don't have any excuses anymore. And some people have made it big doing that. Your social life can get a boost. More parties. I put more parties. Libra is a very social sign to begin with. So this is music to your ears. If I were talking to somebody else, maybe a Capricorn or a Scorpio, maybe people who are more loners, that wouldn't necessarily appeal to them, but it might be the best thing ever for them, especially if they're single, because this is also the house of falling in love. So if you are a single Libra, there's a good chance that you will meet somebody special during the next year with Jupiter here. Whether it becomes the love of your life is a different story, because Jupiter, and I didn't see this. I only looked at a couple sites. It was just to wet my whistle. I just kind of, do my own thing at the end of the day, but I put down some talking points. Jupiter I thought I read one time about this transit with Jupiter in the fifth, that you have a lot of potential love partners, and that makes sense to me. Is that, if you have been dealing with, not really, if you're a single person, it's been kind of like a dry period for you and you haven't met anyone, you might suddenly have a lot of suitors to channel the 1940s or something. And so that would be great, because the more the merrier. I'm not talking about sex partners, although the fifth house, one of the things to know is that the fifth house is a house of casual sex, or they call it recreational sex. So I was going to say, if your Mars is in Scorpio, Libra, but actually, and I'm not talking about Libra rising, because your Mars could be anything. If you're Libra rising and your Mars is in Aries or your Mars is in Taurus, then you're probably going to do that, But for other people, if your Sun is in Libra, I don't know, so you have something that is very lust-filled. But anyhow. But just in terms of falling in love, the reason I think it's a good thing is because, when you have choices in life, then you can really make a great decision. Sometimes if people have very little activity in this area, especially a sign like Libra, which tends to really want to be part of a couple at all times and not be alone. If you might be more tempted to just go with whoever's in your life at the moment, but if you have other options, you'll be, kind of more willing to wait and see, take the wait and see approach. So because this is the house of pleasure and of fun, I mean, you could be going to more parties, meeting and maybe that's why you meet new people. Socializing more, that makes a lot of sense. Getting invited, obviously, that would help. And having fun with your hobbies. That, the fifth house can be hobbies, but anything that you do as a pastime, you may expand your hobbies or go to more concerts or things like that. I mean, hopefully we're going to be opening up more and so that we won't have to deal with these restrictions. So you will be able to go to concerts and stuff like that. So also the fifth house is children. So this could be a great time for you and your children if you have them. And also it's a house of conceiving children. So if you are of the right age, and I don't know if this is just for women, obviously women are the ones who conceive, but men play a part in it. So I'm going to include them as well. Either way, be careful, because you might find that there are greater possibilities to get pregnant or to impregnate somebody. Also, dealing with children. So if this is something that you have wanted to do, maybe you have wanted to have children. So getting back to this conceiving children, maybe you end up having twins. They didn't say that, but I would think expansion. Maybe you could have twins or triplets. So if you're getting in vitro fertilization, so it seems like that happens where it's like, be careful what you wish for. You might get a lot of it, So the other thing, too, is working with children. So if this is something that you have wanted to do, like being a kindergarten teacher or something like that, maybe there's more of a potential for that to go well. Now let's talk about Saturn. Saturn is pretty much the opposite of Jupiter, as I have explained. It's more about discipline, organization, restrictions. So Saturn can restrict your options. And the reason this occurs is it's quality over quantity. So in these houses where there might be some kind of relationship forming or like a social, this is the fifth house because it can involve social engagements. Perhaps there are not as many as, Jupiter is talking about these, but perhaps Saturn tends to curb that influence of Jupiter. But what will happen is that you will see that you have quality being presented. But this, some of the things that I put down here from the sites that I derived information, which I'm going to give a shout out, Cafe Astrology, as well as the Dark Pixie Astrology. I have used these sites before, and I highly recommend them. So thank you to them. So it's like asking yourself these questions. Do you feel deserving of love and attention? Because if you find that it's not as forthcoming, you may feel bad about yourself, especially a Libra, because you do tend to seek that out from other people. So this may be a very important time for Librans to cultivate self-love, so that you're not looking for outward approval. Now, remember that when they're comprising these lists, they are just thinking of Saturn in that house. They're not taking into account Jupiter. So we do have to realize that Jupiter may offset some of the more harsher impacts here, and there may be more opportunities for love. But still, these are worthy questions. Do you feel deserving of it? Do you hold yourself back, when it comes to love, Libra, and feel that it maybe even gravitate towards people who withhold love from you? And so it sets up a certain pattern where you're trying to curry favor from somebody. And this can even be, it doesn't have to be just love, but any kind of friendship or, where you have affection for another person. Are you goofing off more than working? I think this is especially important because they mention, you're preparing for Saturn being in your sixth house, which can be a time of a lot of work, a lot of maybe it's very difficult. You have to slog through for a few years. Again, Saturn is about creating foundations. So sometimes it can feel like you're weighed down by the obligations, but when you emerge from that period, you have everything in place. And, you hear about people who are successful, and sometimes they'll say, oh, yeah, in the early days, I ate ramen, I was working 12 hours a day. They were doing all these things, and then they were able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. But they had to have that labor. They couldn't just bypass that. So at this time, when you're in the house of pleasure, looking at your pleasurable activities and saying, are they kind of sucking at your time? This will also go on when Saturn goes into your sixth house, because that'll be about your daily schedule. But that can be more about organization, while now it can be more evaluating these things and kind of, what is worthy, what can be, kicked to the curb. I put down here getting organized about creativity. I couldn't find it, but I believe that, I saw something to the similar effect, and I think I've read about this before, and it makes sense to me that, if you are an artist, one of the things that is so true about artists, creative types in general, so if you're a graphic designer, maybe anybody who works for themselves, but especially if it's in a creative endeavor, that your brain may be wired differently, and that's how you perceive the world differently. And I would even add people who are spiritually based, meaning that from a young age they had a strong connection to God or source, and they just were very intuitive and things like that. They have intuitive gifts, healers and star seeds, all you guys. I'm including myself in this category, and I think creative and spiritual are one and the same. You know what I mean? I think a lot of spiritual people are going to be creative and vice versa. So we are people who our brains are wired differently, and that affects how we live our lives. And so mastering day-to-day living can be challenging. Maybe even, what kind of just came into my head is ADD. Because I was from a generation where there was no such term as that. But that didn't mean that there weren't people like that, and I think that I'm one of them. And I think that there might be a lot of that within these groups as well. So when you're ADD, when you have issues with organizing your time management, these things come naturally to some people and they seem like no-brainers. But to those of us who are not like that, it's very hard to do it unless we make a concerted effort. So Saturn can help with this. So when, I think of myself and I think of the fifth house where I have a stellium and about this issue of pleasure, of fun. And some of us may live in the moment. And I think that that's fine. But then after, especially if you're working for yourself, you may feel like, okay, what do I have to show for it? Did I really do anything of substance today? Yes, I did what I wanted to do, but, is it going to lead me anywhere ultimately? And it can create a lot of frustration. So kind of the word that just came into my mind is limits, because I think Saturn is about limits. It's saying that there are limits to things. And Jupiter is saying, limits. There's no limits. So somewhere a happy medium where you can have flexible limits. So for instance, all of the things that you find pleasurable, can you, Libra, put them in a certain time frame? This is when I will surf the internet. This is when I will watch TV, or whatever it is. I'm not talking about creative projects, although that should be also, if it's something that you're not doing for a living and you want to cultivate it more, even if you just want to do it for your own relaxation, or like a meditation, if you're somebody who paints. And you might not, it has nothing to do with, this is the talent or what have you, but really giving it its own due. Maybe you watch too much television and you should be doing some more creative projects, and you'll actually relax from that more than watching TV and getting agitated with all the, if there's a lot of negativity or what have you. So there's things on that level that can organize your life a little bit more and make things that are frivolous kind of fall by the wayside. Also, if you are somebody who does have certain talents, and this could be with the fifth house, making use of them, even, having them become your career, because Saturn is the planet that rules Capricorn, and Saturn rules that 10th house of career. So that could be something that you do. Now, as the transit begins, artists, creative people may find that they have a creative block and they have to work through that. But they cannot just give up and say, okay, this isn't working, I'm going to just stop. Saturn is the Lord of Karma, which means that obstacles are part of that. That's really, you could say that's one thing about what karma is. Too many people see it as punitive, and it's really about what kind of obstacles are in your way. Maybe there for a reason. And the journey of unblocking yourself becomes your path to liberation. Okay, that's what I have for you, Libra. I hope that you receive something from this, and good luck to you during this wonderful transit. But one thing I want to say is that in December of 2020, there will be a meeting up of Jupiter and Saturn at the time of the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, when the sun is at its weakest point, and therefore there's a sense of rebirth. And of course, we have Christmas a few days after that. So this idea of rebirth in the southern hemisphere, you have the summer solstice, and the sun is at its peak at that time, and that can have its own set of symbolism there as well. But the thing that it has in common is that it is a solstice, the time when the sun is going into a cardinal sign, in this case Capricorn. So you have the sun going into your fourth house, an angular house, so it's a very important on that level. It's a house where a lot is going on, and then you have this conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn in the fifth house. So to me, that could be some kind of love situation. I'm talking about that it's a good omen for a love that perhaps will last. And Saturn in the fifth house, I didn't see that when I was looking, but I didn't look that hard. I just looked at a couple of pages. I believe that Saturn in the fifth house can be you finding a love that you can take seriously. That's not just a fling, you know what I mean? So in any case, Libra, that's what I have for you, and thanks for listening. Take care. Bye.